This is the City of Waupaca's City Plan Commission meeting.
All right, welcome everybody. We actually have a public hearing that we have to take care of first. So I'll call this public hearing to order. It is Wednesday, December 1st, 2021, and it's 5:15 p.m. In attendance, we have Commissioners Olson and Wayne, Mayor Bernie Smith, and Keeland. So we have two that are absent. We have Angelo Sage is not here. Oh, I'm sorry, and Justin is here also. He's a member of the commission. And Pat Fair is not here, and Angelo Sage are not here at this time. So the purpose of the hearing, Jared, do you want to explain?
So the purpose of this hearing is for a rezone of the future River North subdivision area. So this is a couple of properties in this area. You can see in Exhibit A on page 3 of the packet, the hashed in areas. It is all of these parcels. So as part of the process of creating this new neighborhood, we are looking at grant opportunities. We are looking at partnering with different developers. One of the most recent connections we have made with a developer is related to WIDA housing, which is workforce housing. As part of this tax incentive that we would be applying for, one of the requirements is that the parcels being possibly used for this grant need to have the housing that would be put on there as a permitted use. So currently all these parcels are zoned I-2, which this was an industrial, or still is industrial around it, but an industrial zone for industrial. We would need to rezone it to R3, which is kind of the high level multifamily. It permits single family, it permits two family, permit a bunch of different residential uses. So rezoning this would kind of be the first step. Rezoning it all, as we are kind of still deciding on the exact area we would be putting, applying for this possible tax credits to put up workforce housing. So with it being fluid still, we just wanted to encompass the whole area, which at some point the whole area is going to have to be rezoned as well. So just kind of trying to get it all done at once, make sure that if we for some reason would alter the location, we're not going to jeopardize any grants that we would be applying for.
Okay. Thank you, Jared. So at this time, then, we would take testimony in favor of this rezone. If there's anybody that would like to... Okay. So, go ahead, Aaron.
All right, thank you. So this was sent to all council members as a part of the public input, but probably not all plan commission members. So I wanted to share this. It's from Donovan Lane. He owns Innovia Consulting, which is the old ABC Computers building on 1990 Godfrey Drive. It says, "Hello, we wish to thank the city and their leadership for rezoning the East Business Park from I-2 to R3. We understand that the public hearing will take place on December 7th at 6 p.m. He's referring to a council hearing, and wish to have it known that we certainly agree with the rezone. The residential zoning fills a significant need for upscale housing on the eastern corridor of Waupaca, and hopefully will improve the opportunity for additional family-style housing. We've all gone to great lengths to keep the property in that area aesthetically appealing. We ask that the zoned area be kept in accordance with the look and appeal of the professional and family nature. Thank you."
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Any other testimony in favor of the rezone? If not, we would take testimony in opposition. Any testimony in opposition? Hearing none, I'll close this hearing at 5:21 p.m. And give me just a second to pull up the agenda. All right, so again, welcome to tonight's City Planning Commission meeting. Today is Wednesday, December 1st, 2021, and it is 5:22 p.m. In attendance as commissioners tonight, we have Olson, Wayne, Smith, Barons, and Keelan. And then we have staff. We have Aaron Jensen, our city administrator, and Jarrett Raku, our development director, economic development director. And then we have a couple council members in the audience too tonight, Dave Peterson and Scott Prochaska. Okay, one thing we want to do here is just move right to the presentation, if you don't mind. So I'd like to just get an approval to move number 4 up to number 2 there, and then we'll just go 4, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, if that's okay with you.
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Motion by Keelan, second by Olson, that we approve the amended agenda. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, say no. Motion carried. Aaron, are you going to set this up?
Yeah, I can set this one up, and then I think the rest will be Jared. But so Attorney Steve Sorensen, who's been our legal counsel for all municipal matters here the last year plus, is here. He's done a lot of these presentations in the past to municipalities or at conferences. This one is going to be on signage, as we talked about, a little signage workshop. It's something that we spend a lot of time on as staff, working with business owners, either before the fact or after the fact, if permits were not or applications were not taken out. It's something that I think elected officials and plan commission members may hear a lot about, with frustrations and why is the regulation this way and why does it have to be the way it is. So this is just kind of meant as an educational piece. So Steve has agreed to come, and I'll, without any further explanation, I'll hand it over to Steve. The only other thing I'll say is this is being recorded. So thank you guys for coming, Scott and Dave as well, but for any council members that wish to see it later, they can see a recording. So, all right, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. This is a presentation in theory that I've given probably 60 times. Sign ordinance became a
Steve,
real interest of mine back in
Hey,
the,
Steve, sorry.
Steve,
Yeah.
can you just use the microphone?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go. Especially because we're being recorded. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been my interest since, is it on now?
It is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Since about the 1980s, I've been involved in and out of sign ordinances and the changes. So the presentation that I have is fairly sophisticated if you let me get away with it. But I'm going to try to just bring it to a level that is important here. I also want you to know that I made an effort before putting this together the way I did to drive around Waupaca to try to identify what I thought would be the biggest concerns. Obviously, we get phone calls, and we've been dealing with concerns for a long time, and I'll touch on some of those topics, but it just is an overall plan. So as I go through, don't be afraid to stop me, even the people behind me, the council members, because I really want you, this should be your presentation, and I can answer tons of questions that you want or have. So we start out with the concept, if you do the next slide, which is really this is what sign ordinances are really all about. Sign ordinances are trying to get rid of visual pollution. I think one of the interesting thing is I watched the presentation that Justin did to show you the new downtown Main Street, and I only looked at the signs. I didn't listen to what he was saying. But I looked down the street to try to see what the signs look like. Nice waste paper can you had in front of you. But beyond that, I watched that because I wanted to see what the signage was. And then tonight when I came into town, I wanted to see it at night also. And other than two signs, and I'm not going to say names, it all really blends well. Your downtown looks good. It looks great, and I can show you many downtowns. The one that I'm showing you right here is been used for years and years and years. This is Houston. Houston has no rules. If you've ever been to Houston, Texas, there are no rules. There's no zoning. And it's the most jumbled up mess. Everybody that's ever trained in the world of planning likes to use Houston as their example, because you'll have a single family residence next to a factory, next to a rail yard, next to a hospital. And then you'll put a school in between. But signage is something that affects every neighborhood in every area. And to understand it, just understand that what you're really looking at is, what is the purpose of signage? Well, first of all, look at it from the local government perspective, because that's what we're here for. Signage is a politically charged and often confusing area. I dare say that if I quizzed each one of you on your sign ordinance, maybe Justin might pass, and Aaron could get close. Jared, only if you studied it. But the bottom line is, I don't think any of you could pass or tell me what your sign ordinance says. It is one of the longest, most complicated sign ordinances I've ever worked with. And I'll tell you that right now. Does it have a purpose? Yes, it does. And we'll talk about what that purpose is. Somebody put a lot of time and effort into that sign ordinance, and we'll talk about how that's good and how that's bad. But the one concept that you have to keep in mind is it's a challenge. You're balancing the interests of the community, all the people, against the interest of the property owner. This is really the balancing, because a property owner owns their property, they have the right to do what they want with their property. Well, zoning says that's not true, and we've in the courts have proven for years that it's not true that you can do whatever you want, but there still are landowner property rights. The power that the municipality has is called police power. It's given to you by the state's constitution. The state constitution gives police power to the state, and then they transmit it to the municipalities under the statutes of the state of Wisconsin. That's the power to protect the people. That's what police power is all about. It's a power to protect the greater good, so to speak. And it's found, as I said, in this Constitution and state statutes. You can move down to the next slide if you want, Jason, Aaron, because that's what I'm talking about. Okay, the authority then involves what's your duty. Okay, as a duty of local government, really the number one duty you have is traffic. And whether that's foot traffic, whether that's personal traffic, it's to move traffic in a safe, efficient, and expeditious manner. And that's really where sign ordinances got their genesis. That's where they came from. They came from trying to move people through a community safely. Now, there's other reasons. If you go to the next slide, please, is you want to look at what your role actually is as a municipality. The first one is to look at the conflicts of interest. Every time somebody brings in a sign request or for their sign, there's a conflict of interest. The conflict between what's in the public interest and what's in the private person's interest. I own a grocery store. I want to put a sign up in my grocery store. Why do I want to sign up in my grocery store? I want to sign in my grocery store so people know that I'm a grocery store. Number one. Number two, I want to attract people to come to my grocery store. I want to create an image for my grocery store. Number three, I may want to put specials up there. may seduce people for other reasons to come to my store. And so that's my private interest. Now we have the public interest. The public interest is we don't want somebody driving down, it's not Main, Fulton Street, and suddenly go, oh, and then hit somebody. Most accidents in cities you'll find are because people turn off the driving lane and look to the side. Why do they look to the side? Oftentimes it's because of a brand new sign or a new message that's on a sign. Many communities have said no roving messages, no electronic signs that will continually change. Why? Because they have a tendency to create distraction. We go back to visual clutter. Has a tendency to make your eyes move off of where they're supposed to be. But that's exactly what the sign's purpose is, to get you to see what's there. So you have to balance those two, and that's the conflicting interests. The other role of the municipality, of course, is to create ordinances, to create some type of a standard so that everybody knows, and to understand what those rules are and how to take action. If you go to the next slide, please. So what considerations should you use? I'm going to slow down a little bit, but what considerations should you use? These are the consideration, and the word is not spelled right, aesthetics, but it's there. First of all, nuisance. That's the number one thought that should be in your mind whenever you create a sign ordinance is, am I creating a public or private nuisance? In other words, let's take a sign in a residential neighborhood. Let's say somebody is running for office. I'll make it really complicated. And so they're running for office, and well, I'm trying to make sure I don't pick somebody that's here. Mary's running for office, and she has a big flashing sign that goes, Mary for council, Mary for council, Mary for council, and puts it outside of Eric's window. That's a nuisance. Now, you can read the Wisconsin statute with regard to campaign signs and say, oh, you can't control campaign signs during the period that the election. You can't control them. That's not what the ordinance says, or that's not what the state statute says. It says you can control them to the point that you're not prohibiting them, but they can't become a nuisance. Now, Mary doesn't think it's a nuisance that her name flashes up there, gives her lots of publicity and thought in the community. Eric thinks it's a pain in the butt because he's got this flashing light outside of his bedroom window. That's the differential when you talk about that. That's a private nuisance, though, because the vast majority of the community is not being affected by that. But it's still a nuisance, and it's still something that you should be dealing with. What is a public nuisance? Well, a public nuisance is a sign that was in, there's a place up north, I won't even give you the name of the community, that has a young lady on an electric sign that takes her clothes off. And underneath is a deer. It's not a woman when they takes all the clothes off. It ends out to be a deer. Yeah, but obviously people sit there and watch this, and it takes, you cannot be driving at 55 miles per hour past that sign and see the whole drama. So by the time you're past that sign, your head is already turned. So if there really is a deer in front of you, you're going to hit it. That sign was taken down as a public nuisance because it was making people slow down on the highway. It was causing traffic congestion. Now, did it do a lot of advertising for the restaurant that was advertising? Absolutely. They took it down. They didn't really care because they got the publicity they wanted and they probably knew. But that's one of the big things. Number two is aesthetics. You want to look at how is there a conformity unity. This is the one that we look at in downtown. You don't want a great big electronic sign sticking on one building when everybody else in town has a nice small sign that says John's Jewelers, Mary's Muffins, or whatever the case is. That's the conformity issue. In other words, you want to try to create unity and conformity in your community because the purpose, we'll talk about purposes in a minute, are all spread out in such a way that nobody is getting advantage over the other, and you're doing it in a way that has this nice aesthetic look to it. It's not that jumbled up mess that you saw on that first slide. That's one of the other reasons. Number two or three, and the biggest reasons that most people want to have signs is education and information. You can put those two together if you want to. Why do we put signs up? Because we have a message. You have a historical marker. You want a sign. You want people to be able to read that Waupaca is the birthplace of some famous person. I'm sorry, I don't know one. But the reality is you want that in your community. You want to be able to sell your community. You want something that shows that. You also have messages. Council meeting tonight. You should have a big billboard out in front of the city hall that says, council meeting, all welcome. You know, we're going to affect your rights this evening. Please show up. But, you know, that's the message communication. And churches want to have message signs. And churches are in residential neighborhoods. And is that a consistent practice? Those are the kind of conflicts you look at. Information, the where, the what, the when, the who, and the how. So when I'm talking about you writing signs, you have to remember that somebody that puts up a sign wants to say, you know, where am I at? Where am I going? Where am I at? What do I do here? When am I open? Who is here? And, you know, how do I service you? Those are informational signs. Those are the type of expressions that we want. Expression signs are purely advertising, and we see them all the time. The biggest thing is safety. These are the considerations that we should always go through. Next slide, please. So There's basically two types of signs. On-property commercial, we're only talking commercial right now. We'll talk political and others in a minute. On-property commercial signs and off-property commercial signs. Generally, on-property commercial signs, you start with the premise that everyone should be allowed to have an on-property commercial sign advertising their building. The question becomes, does the sign have to be on the building? Can it be freestanding? And is it going to be limited to certain site activities? Or are we going to let it tell the story, the flashing, the revolving sign? This is the area where you have the most amount of limitation, and this is the area where we have the most conflict. And we'll talk about that as we go on. The other area is off-property commercial signs. I will tell you right now that most communities outlaw off-property commercial signs. They just say, nope, you either put a sign on your property or you don't. That's not true in rural areas, because many times in rural areas you have to have an off-property sign in order to get the people to come in. That's not true when somebody from the city of Waupaca goes out to the town of Waupaca. Is there a town of Waupaca? Okay, the town of Waupaca, and puts a sign out there because they're trying to get them to come into the city. You can't control that. They can control that. You can't. But in the city of Waupaca, there's probably very little reason, given the nature of your community, to have commercial signs that are off property. Very, very strict area. Most communities will not allow off-property signs. There's exceptions. Everything is exception, but most of them don't. And the only exception is the public interest. If there is a public interest in having an off-property sign, then it allows. And it's usually heavily controlled. Next slide, please. Now, these are just quickly signs that we just don't think about very often, and we should. Official government signs. Obviously, the government has the right to put signs up anywhere they want, but they shouldn't. The government should have restrictions on where they put up signs just as much as the commercial people should have. In other words, the city should think about when they put up a city hall sign, or remember I told you, put a billboard out in front of the city saying city council meeting. Those, in other words, the rules should apply. Now, there's exceptions that would say the city or the municipality or the governmental agency. For example, you're going to have a tough time telling the post office they can't put a sign up. Although there is a case that came out of, I think it was New Hampshire, that says you can tell the post office they can't advertise if their sign conflicts with the conformity and the unity of the community. And we can talk about that in a minute. Government signs are generally informational and directional, or welcoming signs. Welcoming signs are very well regulated. Most communities allow welcoming signs, but they're usually owned by the Chamber of Commerce, and they'll have different rules and regulations, but they are really commercial in nature, but they also have an informational. But those are still considered governmental signs for purposes of Wisconsin statutes. Other signs that somehow pop up that we don't even think about are service club, religious notice, tourist directional signs, and the one that really creates abundance of problems is the event sign. You know, when there's going to be an event, parade this weekend, and they put signs all over. Or my favorite is whenever the circus comes to town, it's like every log in town has a billboard stuck to it. And then there's some big signs in the walkways, those tent signs saying, you know, circus coming to town. And if you take them down, you're the most evil person in the world, even though your ordinance says they can't be there. And yours does, and most communities do. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is enforcement issues. And again, I'm just trying to give you an overview, and then we'll talk specifically about the city. Code enforcement is a function of local government. The state's not going to help you with this. So this is really your problem. And what are you trying to establish? You're trying to establish the concept that what you're really doing is you're trying with your enforcement to bring uniformity to the community. You're trying to protect the community. Generally, it's safety, property values, and environment. I mean, that's really what you're at. except that when you're picking on my sign, you're just being a jerk. But when you're picking on the sign out there on the, coming into town, out on, let's pick on Churchill now, then that's okay, because that's a crap place out there, but not downtown with my nice store. Don't you tell me what I'm going to do. And that's where you have to really understand that. Protection really is based upon, as I talked, the annoying intrusion into the free use of property. That's the one I hear all the time. You're taking away my rights. I have a right. And we talk about political signs. We'll talk about that more. The use of warnings and notices, that's really where you use your police power. And we can talk about how you do that. I recommend, and Aaron can tell you this, but whenever we've had one, I've said, well, try to persuade them to agree that they really shouldn't paint the whole side of their building in a mural that says, put an end to free speech. You have to think about that, and you have to think about the purpose of it, and you have to think how you integrate into a community. That's why oftentimes, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is sign ordinances really should be driven by your Chamber of Commerce more than your city council. As far as, it's the people that want the signs should be part of the game as to far as how they're going to be controlled. Self-help is available. Many communities have a specific statute that says any public member taking down an illegal sign will not be charged with trespass. So you can do that if you wish. It's a good way to get those circuses coming to town signs off of the light poles or utility poles. It's important. But if you're going to prosecute someone, the Constitution does require due process, which can take a long time to get a sign down that you want, unless you can get an injunction because it's dangerous. Next slide, please. This is the one that your previous zoning administrator always wanted to talk to me about, was constitutional challenges. And I'm just going to give you a real brief overview of this. The Constitution of the United States does allow you free speech. However, it also allows regulation of commercial speech. And if you look at the definitions, what you're doing is, did the communication deceive the public or support an illegal activity? If it does, you have a right to control it. Does the sign or does the state have a substantial interest in restricting the speech? If it does, you have an absolute right to control it. Does the regulation advance a state interest? If it does, you have a right to use it. Can the government interest be accomplished by a less restrictive method? You have to consider it. If there is one, you have to use it. Those four criteria are the number one criteria about messaging and signs. The Gilbert versus Reed case, which came out of Arizona, was a case where they had put up a sign that basically told how to get to a church reception. And it was a temporary sign. It was against the rules in Gilbert. They went to the U.S. Supreme Court on this, and the court basically said, no, you cannot discriminate against somebody advertising their church supper or their church meeting. Now, that whole case has just blown up. And the reason it blew up, next slide, please. The reason it blew up is because there were 6 different opinions written in that case. That's the reason that you hear so much about the Gilbert case. And every person in zoning and administration and planning loves to talk about Gilbert because there's 6 different opinions. If you boil it all down, and I've spent hours on that case, what you still have to know is any decision that they're saying this is what Gilbert says is still speculation. There is a case right now that's being heard by the Supreme Court this term that's going to give definition, we think, to Gilbert. And if you look at the makeup of the court right now, especially with the latest addition to the court, Judge Barrett, I think you're going to find that the implication is that a community has a lot more control over signs than were thought by many of the people reading Gilbert. Anyway, so the multiple decisions gives us multiple discrepancies. Municipal government articles, they're abundant. All I'm going to say to you as a group is don't lose any sleep over Gilbert. It just isn't worth it. Now, if you're a college professor or even a high school senior social studies professor or teacher, learn it, have fun talking about it. But those of us that are in the trenches enforcing sign ordinances, we're not finding Gilbert arguments at all. We hear about them, but we really don't see them. That's not what people are fighting about. They're fighting about much more mundane issues, and we'll talk about those. But I wanted to put this in because I know it's been an issue in the community. What's the impact of Gilbert? Okay, what action should a local government take? In other words, what action should this plan commission take? Well, this is what I talked about, and this is where I'll slow down a little bit. Because this, I think, what I'm here for tonight is you ought to take a look at your sign ordinance, and you ought to bring a community group that's really affected by that ordinance together, and you ought to create what I call the committee and go through each one of the segments of that ordinance and talk about, go back to those standards. Why is this ordinance here? What's the purpose of it? Because if you're going to ensure that your sign regulations really do create the message you want them to have, you really do need to have public dialogue. Public dialogue is how sign ordinances really, the community buys into them. I mean, I look at downtown, and like I said, there's 2 signs downtown that if I were the dictator of Waupaca, I would go take those 2 signs down. The rest of them can stay up. And you can say, why? And I'd say, because they don't belong. Now, there's one that's really out of place, but belongs. That's the one at the theater. I don't even know if it's still a theater, but it's unique. It's creative. It has a place. It tells the message of what that is. And I don't think it's bright and garish. Maybe it is. I just saw it tonight, and I saw it in the walk. It stands out. It can be a symbol of the community. But there's a couple others that just say one word on a great big sign that serves no purpose. It didn't tell me what it was about. It didn't tell me what was going on. It didn't answer any of those questions. That's the kind of discussion you need to have. And then you need to develop a methodology, because here's the problem you've got right now is when somebody comes in and says, I would like to put up a sign, you can spend hours in your ordinance and you can spend time looking at each one of the intricacies saying, if it's in this area, it can be 11 square feet. Well, yeah, but I just bought it from this company and it's 12 square feet. Nope, it's 11. Yeah, but it's just a little bit on the edges. Nope, it's 11. Take it to, for a variance. Well, that's, you really need more strength and flexibility. And the way you do that is you take your sign ordinance and you say, because of this reason, we're going to limit this to 12 square feet, or we're going to limit this to 11 square feet. Because, in other words, tell people why in your ordinance you're doing that, because then they can have an understanding. Otherwise, it looks like an artificial number that just got picked out of the middle of nowhere and just thrown on a piece of paper. And so I think that's one of the things that I would suggest that you look at is you develop a methodology that says to people, if you want this kind of a sign, you have to have it meet with the other interests. It can't be against public safety. In other words, you can go all through the legitimate reasons that you can have a sign, the purpose of a sign, and then let the person decide. Then they can bring in their application. Don't have them bring their application for a sign permit in until you've taken them through that process. Next step, or next slide, please. Okay, the other things, we talked about this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, is always keep an idea there's a difference between commercial and non-commercial signs. However, even though I say that, there's really not a lot of excuse for non-commercial signs. There's not an excuse for a lot of non-commercial signs. If you go back to the purpose of signs, the purpose of signs are to basically to educate, to inform, to create safety. Those are the purposes. Non-commercial signs have very limited purposes. What are they? Well, non-commercial sign is fair downtown next week. Okay, what's that? That's a temporary purpose. That can be a temporary sign. It's a non-commercial sign. Treat it as a temporary sign. It could be a sign that says, trying to think of a non-commercial sign. They're hard to come by. The one we're seeing a lot of, and I'll talk about that, the political signs are the, Norwegian lives matter. Bring back the Norwegian. And that's a non-political sign in the sense, or non-commercial sign in the sense that it's not trying to sell a product. It's not trying to sell something. And that sign, yeah, it has a place, but again, what's the purpose of the sign? If the purpose of the sign is to create friction between Norwegians and Swedes, then that sign shouldn't be allowed. If it's a sign that's to create, create disruption in the community. And that's the kind of methodology you need to have when you're talking about non-commercial signs. You really need to say to the person, what is your purpose? Okay, if your purpose is this, that's fine. That's a legitimate purpose. That's a good cause. Blood drive next Friday at the church. Okay? We can put together a temporary sign for that purpose. And we put that under temporary signs. That's so good. But do they need to say all year round, blood drives at this church? Is that really communicating something? I mean, that's the kind of discussion you need to do when you define the signs. The other thing you always want to define is what materials are going to be used. And this applies to commercial and non-commercial signs. Bed sheets are not signs. Maybe during homecoming, but are they really a sign, when they're going down the street on a parade or something? But bed sheets are not signs. And you can simply say that. Signs must be made of permanent materials, and you can list them. That's a good purpose. And it's really important you think that through when you look at your signs. Location of signs. You cannot you do not want signs, and you want to make a strict prohibition against signs that are located in any visual sight pattern of any intersection. No sign should be allowed in a visual sight pattern. I mean, that's just a universal rule that you can put in. Now, in your ordinance, you say that about 14 times in different places. You can just say it once, and you can make it easy. You can develop standards that show what the compelling state interest is, and that's what I talked about before, is what you want to do with your sign ordinances. You want to say, what's the purpose of the sign? The sign is to communicate. It's to communicate what we do here, what we serve here, what we sell here. Fine. If it communicates that in a pleasant, unified manner to the rest of our community, that's great. If it's not doing that, then we're not going to permit it. And we're not taking away your right, because we're giving you a right. That's the kicker you want to remember. We're giving you a right to have a sign. We're just telling you what that sign should or should not say. Next slide, please. So what you really want to do is you want to put together the applicable rules and standards. These are the applicable rules and standards that you can always put in your back pocket. Rules that regulate the location of a sign being placed, absolutely permitted. Rules distinguishing between lighted and unlighted signs, absolutely permitted. Rules distinguishing between signs with fixed messages and electronic signs, absolutely permitted. Rules distinguishing between the placement of signs on private and public property, absolutely. These are all areas that you can limit the use of a sign. As long as you have a justified reason under your police power, you can do that. Distinguishing on-premise and off-premises, total number of signs allowed per mile of roadway, rules regarding time restrictions on how long a sign can be up if it's for a specific purpose, for a specific event. Every one of these 8 categories are something that either the Wisconsin Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court has said is a standard you can use. How do you avoid challenges to your ordinance? Well, it's really quite easy. You use the right words. So you don't have ordinances say no real estate signs. That's discriminatory. You don't have signs that say no political signs, or only political signs will be allowed. That's discriminatory. Or, you don't say you can't have garage sale signs. People are allowed to sell their garage. You just have to say what the activity is, and you can use that, but you don't want to discriminate. And that's why you need somebody who has a neutral view at times to review the ordinance and look at it. Focus on, and these are the things you want to focus on: number of signs, area of signs, height of signs, placement, lighting, movement, duration. You'll notice that every one of those came out of those Supreme Court cases. Next slide, please. What else can you do? Well, you can substitute clauses should read, allow only non-commercial signs to be permitted where commercial messages are allowed. In fact, you have basically that in your ordinance. You basically say that non-commercial signs must follow the same rules as your commercial signs. It's an interesting concept. Avoid content based on definitions. And again, you've done a really good job of that. I went through and read the whole ordinance. And there's nothing that really you get caught up on using definitions like real estate, like garage sale. Those are definitional signs that are definitional rules that you got to avoid. Severability, here's one of the ones that people don't see very often. You write a sign that says, or an ordinance says, you can do this except if it is and then you say, I'll give you a classic one, unless it is a service club. Bingo, you've just discriminated. Because I'm not a service club, I'm the local, drum and bugle corps. Why do you say I can't put the sign up, but the Rotary and Kiwanis can? You've got to worry about things like that, and people don't think about that when they do that. So you want to look at not having any standards. Master plans, I love it. You want a real good life, just say every sign has to fit in this box. One community actually created like 4 different boxes, and you could say if you're going to be in this neighborhood, it has to fit in that box. And if your sign went in that box and came out of that box, you could put it. And the next one, if you can put it in and out, that's where it can put it. It made life very, very easy. Nobody measured anything. Nobody had to worry about it. It had to fit in that box, and if it didn't, couldn't do it. I'm not going to say that that's the greatest ordinance in the world, but it worked for them. Limited number of categories. That's the one thing I would really suggest you do when you look at your ordinance. Try to get it down to a smaller number of, you have categories all over the place. And you really should think about that. And then you just want to deregulate some of the categories. Just either flat out ban them altogether or try to reclassify them into a different group. Next slide, please. I did say I would talk about political signs because I know that's an issue. Now, state law is driven under the cloud of what we call the First Amendment. First Amendment says you have the freedom of expression. You have the right to express yourself. However, that is a limited right, and you have to keep that in mind. Now, the biggest thing you have to keep in mind right now, and this is the biggest crux of a problem we have going on in the state right now, is distinguishing between election signs and political viewpoint expression signs. If I put a sign up right now, and I'll just be very, very candid because you'll all understand what I'm talking about now. If I put a sign up that says, elect Trump, that is a political sign because it's talking about electing the former president to another term, I presume. But it's a political sign. If it just says, Trump made America strong, that is an expression sign. Those are 2 different types of signs. And you have to keep that in mind. Now, can you control both of those signs? The answer is absolutely yes. But it's harder to control the sign that just is a political viewpoint expression sign than it is to control the campaign sign, because the state has passed a law that says you cannot put up a campaign sign in the state of Wisconsin until the first opportunity for a person to officially announce their candidacy or register. In other words, what is it, December
1st.
December 1st. So today was the first day you could turn in papers or pick up your papers. The bottom line is that's the first day you could put up an advertising sign for your election. When is the last day? April 5th. I just thought you guys would know more than I would. But that's the last day. The next day they have to come down. That is what the state statute says. So all the signs that you see throughout the countryside that still have, Biden for president, they all should come down. I'm not using the obvious, but, it's really there, and what we need is we need enforcement, and that is tough, I know and I understand, and I'll be the first. And interestingly enough, the state statute gives you as a municipality the right to take them down.
May I?
Yeah.
There's a property on Fulton Street. I'm sure most of you have seen it. He's got two political viewpoint signs out, and he also has a flag that to me would be a political event flag. Is a flag a sign?
A flag is a sign under your ordinance. Because it is a instrument that's trying to project a message to the community. It's a sign.
It's not a bed sheet, but it's it's a
Well,
flag.
the next closest thing to it. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I mean, there's no question that you're allowed to have a political expression, okay, but you've got to conform with the sign ordinance, which means you can have a political expression sign as long as it conforms, which means it cannot be a nuisance, okay? It cannot be distracting. I can go through the whole criterion with you. And 3 political signs on a building would be too many. Now, if they said, like I said, Make America Great, it's tougher to make them take that down than it is to take a sign down that says, Sorensen for president. I mean, that's easy because there's no presidential election right now. So that's the toughie. Many, many communities are allowing by statute you to put up one political expression sign in your property. That's it. And they're saying that you can put it up for a temporary period of time. Now, is that going to get challenged? Yes. It's going to get challenged. Some group is going to challenge it. Does Waupaca want to be the community? I don't know. Since I'm doing the legal work, sure, go ahead. Let's make it but the bottom line is you have to be a little careful. Those 3 signs are all signs. They're not anything but signs. Flags, banners, you've got them right now. I just came into town. You've got these steel poles that come out of the ground, and they got like a banner hooked on them. And I don't know where they got the permits for those. Did you issue permits for those?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean, every one of those should come down, because I couldn't find in your ordinance how those would be permitted. But how many people stick those out? Tax season, they stick them out. There's one on Churchill coming in that I saw tonight. But those are things that should be, unless you write an ordinance that allows them, those are things that the sign companies are selling and telling people that you can put them in the right-of-ways. And you really can't, but they're there. The other thing is, don't get involved with communities that have, or subdivisions that have their own rules. Now, here's one of the ones that could make your life easy. This is where I worry when I'm being broadcast out to the community. If you live in a subdivision, your subdivision can get together and say, we're not going to allow any signs. That's a private covenant. And if they sign and agree to that, that's a contract. That has nothing to do with the government. It has nothing to do with the Constitution of the United States. Because the Constitution of the United States is the government cannot take away my right of free speech. Can I voluntarily give up my right of free speech? I can sign a contract that says I won't talk bad about my employer ever if he pays me an extra $500. That's a legal, enforceable agreement. Well, moving into a subdivision, if you sign into the restrictions of that subdivision and you agree to them, that's an enforceable covenant. So that is not the job of the community. That's not the job of the, you should suggest to subdivisions, if you don't like that in your subdivision, get your neighbors together, form a homeowners association, write your own covenants, and you can do that. Now, the only thing that you can't prevent, because there's a statute that says you can't prevent it, is the for sale sign. And Your covenant cannot discriminate by race, color, creed, national origin, marital status, sexual preference. I mean, all the suspect classes. But saying that you can't have bed sheets hanging out your window is not a suspect class. It's not a protected class. Saying that you cannot display anything but the American or the Wisconsin flag is not a suspect class. And I know people do that. So let's see. He's getting ahead of me now. Okay, I just wanted to, I'm pretty much wrapping this to where I want to get to. There's examples, your code section is I embedded it into this because I didn't want to waste a lot of paper, but that's where your code is if you want to go look at it, and the code section's there. And we can go through that if you want to this evening, but then I gave you 4 cities that I thought you should take a look at. You have to imagine, those of you that have ever been to Wisconsin Dells, what the problems with their signage in Lake Delton are. Because that's their lifeblood, is getting you to go to all. But they have a very simple but direct sign ordinance that basically says you have to do it in conformity with everyone else, and you can't interrupt anybody else's visual. So in other words, you can't put a sign up that keeps you from seeing the next attraction. And they've written it with a lot of discretion, but it's clear as to the message. That if I can prove that you're interfering with somebody else, bingo, your sign has to be corrected. And it's just a good one to look at. I picked the village of Twin Lakes because it's a resort community, and it talks about resort-type activities. City of Eau Claire, I picked that one because it's one of the newest ones, and it's there. And the village of Waupaca is one that the Wisconsin League of Municipalities thinks is great, so I threw that in. You can look at them. We can go through them if you want sometime. My whole purpose today was, here's where I think you have to get to, is if you remember the purpose and the role of regulation, and you keep that in mind, and then also keep in mind the rights of property owners, you're going to be able to put together beautiful sign ordinances because you're going to have the balance that's necessary. What happens is too often you over-regulate to the point that all you're doing is doing exceptions all the time, because you get it too tight. Now, the opposite is you get it too loose, and then and I could go back to my first slide, then you look like Houston, Texas, with signs all over the place in everybody's way. But if you simply use some of the concepts that I've thrown out here today to be the guiding wire towards the success, I think you'll find that you can get there. Okay, I'm up for questions.
So, Steve, we obviously have had sign ordinance, and we've redone the sign ordinance, and if we redo it again, how does that affect signs that are up? Would they all be grandfathered in, or would there be a way to, if there is those 1 or 2 that are in town that we've allowed to stay up, would they be grandfathered in, or would they have to comply?
There's 3 answers to that. The first answer is yes, they're going to be grandfathered in. The second is called incentive programs. And third is public pressure. That's what I have seen work. I watched a community that wanted to get rid of a lot of the old ugly signs. They went and funded a grant program that let people replace their signs if they would do it in conformity with what they did for their master plan of signage. And it turned out it was a downtown project, looked a whole lot better. And it was through pressure, and it was through grant programs. But the answer to your first question and your ultimate answer is, no, you can't make them take it down. You can sneak up in the night and loosen the bolts, I suppose.
Well,
Well, I wanted to get some work, when you get arrested.
right, yeah, there you go.
No, you always have the problem of grandfathered signs. You always have the problem. But keep in mind that disrepair means it comes down. If your sign is not kept up, is not kept in good condition, and it's in disrepair, it comes down if it's a non-conforming sign. That's just simple. It can't be resurrected, so to speak. So Joe's barbecue has been closed for a year. The sign looks like crap. Now Joe is going to sell to Melinda's muffins. Can't use that sign. Joe's sign is non-conforming. You've changed owners. New sign. It's got to come down. Can't use that structure even. So a non-conforming sign, when you've changed ownership, especially if the non-conforming sign is in any state of disrepair, should come down. You should enforce that, if that helps.
So you were spot on when you said that every time somebody comes in to apply to put a sign up, we are making exceptions, or we're spending a lot of time on that where we shouldn't have to. It should be fairly simple, if I'm getting what you're saying, to get everything to be in the same. And then the other part too, I was going to say too, is can you expand a little bit more on setting up a committee and what maybe some of these other communities have done? Because basically our committee right now is just our planning commission.
Yeah, and the interesting thing with your planning commission is you have a vested interest for the public. You don't have a vested interest for the downtown merchants, per se. You don't have
one. Unless you are one.
Yeah, but then you have it for you.
Yeah.
Okay? I mean, then you're here with a sole purpose. You really need to get, and I don't know how good your chamber is. I don't know how good your downtown, Main Street is. I mean, that's beyond, but you have to have buy-in. You have to get that group together. You have to say to them, if you leave this up to the council, we're going to say every sign can only be, 5 feet long and 2 feet high, and it's got to be flat against, and that's what we're going to propose. Now, if you don't like that, you better show up at the meeting next Wednesday, and let's talk about this, or let's, I had one young mayor in a community. I thought he was being a bit obnoxious, but he just went store to store. And he just confronted every person. I think he was running for re-election, but he probably lost when he got done. He said to him, if we take your sign down, what do you want? And people were, what do you mean take our sign down? Well, your sign is ugly. We got to take it down. It doesn't fit the motif of the community. We want to create this new environment. What would you want? Let me write it down. What would you like? Well, if you had your perfect sign, what would you like? Developed a concept by got through 8 or 10 businesses downtown. What was the downtown concept? Now, it's harder when you go out, like Fulton Street, is that the one that goes out the highway? Yeah. Because you get the hotels and the McDonald's and the Hardee's, and you're not going to change them. They're going to put their signs up unless they really, really want to be in your community. And you have a very, very strict, like a Monroe, Wisconsin, or a Cedarburg that says, there's no golden arches here, and they will conform. They will build a McDonald's that looks like a Swiss chalet if they want to be in your community. And so people say, well, we can't change. That's not true. But I know that's probably your biggest morass of signs is between downtown and the highway. Yes, sir.
Steve, I have a question, and it's off of what the mayor said. The mayor said we seemingly sometimes are making exceptions to things that come in, and I think that's true. And I think the reason it's true is because something you said before, and it's that we have a lengthy ordinance that's convoluted and can be up for different interpretations, right? So that's something we see, something we interpret as staff. Maybe is interpreted differently, and maybe there's an argument from a business standpoint, and then the person that's having to administer that code is like, oh, it's a tough spot, right?
Well, that's why if you had a committee of people that had signs that sat there with you, you might get a universal interpretation because they're the ones that are going to have to live with it. I mean, I think you have to engage the business community somehow because they're the ones that are interested in saying, you don't have to worry. I mean, church signs, That was it. Where was that town? That was down by Madison. I worked with a town. They got all their churches together. Everyone, I mean, a ministerial society, and they said, okay, listen, we're going to pass an ordinance about church signs. And you thought that you were going to shoot each one of those ministers. And they said, no, you get to pick it. But we don't want these great big signs. We don't want to keep changing. We want everyone to have what they think is what they need. So pastors, go ahead and write up, or get your church council to write up what you want for a church sign. And when you get done, we'll put it in the ordinance. This is what church signs are going to be. Well, that's how you get conformity. You know, you utilize the players, the people that have a vested interest,
So
rather than police power.
And the way I'm kind of thinking about this, you said create a committee. You mentioned Chamber of Commerce, potential businesses to help you go through this process of looking to structure your code. And once you have that sign code structured, that in my eyes, and I don't want to speak for Plan Commission and everybody, but it would be a code that you felt like wasn't up for interpretation a bunch, but also provided that flexibility to a certain extent. And I know you and I have talked about different ways to build that in. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, because once the public puts their input in, once the public tells you what they want and they like, and now is when the professionals get to put it in code. In other words, this is your chance, public, to tell us what you like, and we'll tell you why it will work and won't work. We'll meet with you, we'll talk with you, and we'll create these parameters. Like I said, create the windows. Fits in, fits in, fits in. I mean, that's pretty easy. And that's what you want a code to do, is you want them to develop a code that they can live with. Then you'll put the parameters on it. Then you'll build the, they give you the idea. You're like a structural engineer. Guy says, I want a bridge to go from here to here. Well, what do you want it to look like? Well, I want it to be pretty. Well, what do you mean? Well, I want, then you design the bridge. That's what the professional staff is for, is designing the code once they tell you what they'll live with and what they like. But you got to drag that out of them, what they want.
And then the last question that I won't ask anymore, I don't think, would be, oh man, I lost it here.
Well, look, can I step in just quickly?
Sure,
in here
you're the
too?
mayor.
So, yeah, thanks. I forgot. We do have businesses that are specific that I would say in general terms are probably abusers of signs. And you mentioned the fast food business, but also like the car dealerships. And is it wrong to put them in a separate category than maybe a downtown business? That, I mean, we've been told by, like, for example, on the east side of town, they just took over that dealership a few years ago, and they were told by, what do they sell, GMCs or whatever they sell over there, they had to put up these signs, and they didn't meet our code, and so, we ended up allowing them, but they weren't within our zoning code at that time.
Yeah, and I played that card a lot. And here's the question. They will allow other signs. The only time they won't allow other signs if they're trying to get rid of the dealership. And GMC Chevrolet would like to get rid of some of the rural dealerships and have you all go to Appleton to buy your car at Bergstrom, okay? Because for them, well, I'm just telling you, I mean, that's a reality. I dealt with Wautoma, I dealt with Ripon. I mean, they fought that game. They said, it's got to be like this or else we're taking the franchise. That's when it gets to be tough. But I'm telling you that they'll bend if you push hard enough, if they want the dealership to stay there, if the franchise. But you just have to push back, that's all. You say, too bad, so sad. We're not changing our ordinance just for you. I don't like GMC anyway, you can tell them. I mean, I'm a Ford man. But what I'm trying to say politely to you is, you have to know when to push and when to back, and that's why you guys are the council, and I'm just the guy that comes into town you know, and tells you what to do and leaves quick. But the bottom line is, they'll bend. I've watched, like I said, I watched McDonald's turn their McDonald's into a chalet, because they said no, take your McDonald's and go somewhere else.
We were similar to that here when they redid the McDonald's, quite honestly. Although I think it looks nice now that it's up, you know. I mean, just because it didn't meet our zoning regulations or our sign regulations, that doesn't mean that what they were trying to do was wrong. You know what I'm saying? Same thing with the car dealerships. I'm not saying it was wrong. It just didn't fit into our sign ordinance.
Well, see, but that's what's wrong when you have an ordinance that's too tight. And if you had an ordinance that says you can have 3 signs per every 500 feet, that the height of a sign can be no higher than any other sign on the roadway. I mean, you can write a sign ordinance with talking with people that live out in that area or work out in that area, plus the council, because you represent the whole community, and you can develop a sign ordinance that everybody can live with. So the next guy that comes along and says, well, I want to put, you go, nah, we didn't let Joe do that. We're not going to let you do it. Because you're going to live like everybody else. Your signs are all going to be this high, and they're all going to be this size, and they're not going to be rotating, and they're not, you know, well, my company won't let me. It's not a problem.
So I want to make sure I understood what you said before. I think I do understand it, then I'll let other people talk too. But so if we have a non-conforming sign, or we just have a sign that we believe is, or just basically an ugly sign, which we want to change the ordinance and it would be grandfathered in, you're saying that they could give up their grandfather rights by us giving them an incentive to do that.
Yep. I mean, bottom line, if you want to clean up a neighborhood of signs, you may have to create an incentive program of some kind. You know, a facade loan program or something. I mean, that's just a reality check. I mean, because a lot of people are just on a margin anyway. They don't have the money to fix it. It's the person that has this bar he's owned for 40 years, and by golly, you're not going to tell him to change his sign. You know, that's the one you say, okay, we're not telling you where to sign, but here's the notice that if you sell this place, that sign's coming down. We're giving you notice right now. And by the way, we're going to record that at the Register of Deeds office. So if somebody goes to buy that property, it's going to show up on your title. Because you have a dangerous non-conforming sign and we want it down. And that's getting tough. Yeah, sometimes salespeople will take you to court, but sometimes you got to get tough. That's what you have police power for. That's why the government has created that power for you all as a council and mayor and plan commission.
Anybody else? Dave, Scott, you guys have any comments or questions?
We don't want to, from my perspective, we don't want to lead ourselves to be the sign police and have somebody doing a job, all they do is drive around and look at signs either. So I think if we can
And again,
make it,
that's why you want your community to police it. You want to say to the people on Fulton Street, you know, why don't you all have a meeting sometime? You know, we'll bring some cookies down here to the, you know, City Hall, and you can chit-chat about signs. Let's go look at them. I mean, bring me or somebody else in that can say, here, this is not a good sign. This is a good sign, you know. I mean, I think people don't even see it. They see it all the time from their perspective. And then, of course, once the sign's paid for, you know, I have to change it, you know. You know, I mean, that gets to be hard, but that's where sometimes the carrot works. If you're trying to improve the looks of your community, which I'm sure you are. You know, you think about the money you spend on things that people don't see. Well, this is something they will see. This will get you reelected. No, I'm just.
Question, if you're all right.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Steve, when we look at the question I forgot before,
Yeah.
is the timeline. So we talk about creating a committee, looking at this section of the zoning code. Now, this plan commission is coming off of little over a year of looking at the entire zoning code, going through it with our previous zoning administrator. I think one thing that if I could do that again, we would maybe take the amount of time that we took going through the entire zoning code on a section of the zoning code to make sure there was an in-depth understanding of everything. Give me your opinion on working through an overhaul of the sign ordinance through a committee like you talked about with the Chamber of Businesses.
I think by September you could have it done.
So about a year-ish, little less. So, okay.
A little less, yeah. I think only because you want to go through at least 2 seasons. Winter is just not a great time to talk about signs. But spring and summer really are a good time to talk about signs.
Is there a good time to talk about signs? Sorry. My opinion.
Yeah, well,
Well, yeah, when you want to talk about it is when somebody's upset. When somebody comes in and says, Joe just put up this sign out there and you let them do it, and now they can't even see my store. There's no way they can see now I got to put one of those pole signs up out there. That's the good time to talk about it, because now you got the ire of the community. But I push this thing to my business community and say, you have a responsibility here. Otherwise, you leave it. This is kind of the way you approach this. And maybe they're all watching time, which is good. You approach it saying, if you don't do it, we'll fill in the gap. And this is where you talked about it, Aaron. This is where you do say, no, here's the 4 corners. You're not getting this sign. Well, come on. No, there's 4 corners. You don't like it, form a committee, change it, but I don't have time to sit here and say, well, it can be 2 inches more, it could be 3 inches more. Build it according to what it says, or don't. I mean, you don't do that with houses. I mean, you don't sit there and look at a design of a house for a week saying, well, yeah, I suppose you could go 6 inches higher, and yeah, you could be about a foot closer, and yeah, a side yard of 14 feet instead of 15. What the heck? Do you? Now, if you tell me you're doing that, then I'm going to really feel bad. But
No.
no, it's just people get so used to pushing the umbrella, and it's really hard to enforce. And and I know that enforcing your code is tough because it's a tough code.
Right.
I mean, it's like designed to have no, one uniform sign all through the city, which would be cool if you could do it. Welcome to Waupaca. Here are the 12 stores in town. They have little white boxes on front of them,
so I have one more question too, sorry. So when we do this new sign ordinances, if that's what we decide to do, and we have signs out there that are non-conforming at the time, they're even non-conforming under our current codes, but they're still up there, are they still grandfathered in? So,
But those are the ones I would start with and try to work with.
yeah,
I mean, I identify 4 signs, or let put all the names of every businessman in town and pick out 5 and say, you 5 are going to go find out which signs are bad in town and give them to us.
And if we didn't do, all of them would be non-conforming, which means that they could be maintained into perpetuity unless they came down in a storm, like you said before.
Well,
or
that's
so
not
on and
quite
so forth.
correct. If you determine that they're dangerous
Sure,
and they're a nuisance, you can have them come down.
right.
I mean,
or in disrepair,
yes. Well, that would make them dangerous, and yeah.
I
yeah.
guess.
I mean, like I said, and I didn't go check it out, but there's one sign when I drove through town that I would want to go check. If I were the zoning administrator, I'd go check that sign, just to make sure that I'm not walking under it when it comes down, because I don't want to be there. You couldn't guess which one I'm talking about. Yeah, you could, but that's okay. Any other questions?
I don't think so. So, I don't know, Jared, if you do, but Steve, so where do you fit in on this as we work through this? Is this something that we would, let's say that we put together a new signage, would we involve you in the process, or?
That's totally up. I mean, it's really totally up to you. I mean, the one thing that I can bring to the table is a lot of experience with sign ordinances in many different communities. And I can bring to the table getting people in a group to try to pick out those 5 things they want or those 6 things they want. But you get professional staff that could probably do the same thing. I mean,
Okay.
it just sometimes, you know, the old philosophy, if you find somebody that's more than, 40 miles out of town, he's an expert. Sometimes that works, you know. Sometimes it doesn't work, you know.
Well, the other side of the coin too is that if we do have issues, you are the one that's representing us. So.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly want to be part of the drafting of anything because I want to make it so we can enforce it.
Right.
I don't want to build a mousetrap that lets the mouse go every time.
Nor do we.
Because otherwise you take the laissez-faire approach, which just says, build whatever you want. You know, I mean, we just don't have time to do that. We're too busy worrying about more important things.
Yeah. That sounds great. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, I hope I didn't keep you up too late.
No. No Brewer game, no Packer game. I don't know if the Bucks.
I don't think Marquette was playing or Madison tonight, so. Okay, so if you have any other questions, anything else you need me for?
Not today. Thank you, Steve.
I guess I was just going to make a quick comment, regarding Aaron and I had just talked about one of the recent changes that went through the sign ordinance involved hanging signs, which at the time we didn't permit in our code, and which, due to them not being in our code, they weren't technically allowed. So we did go through. We went, made a requirements for hanging signs. Enforced 2 separate cases. One was on, both were downtown areas. So one, the ordinance worked. The other one today, I had to inform that it didn't work for them and they needed to take their signs down. So, as we talked about, bringing people together, discussing what they want and then bringing it to staff level experts, reviewing it, making sure it works. Because obviously if we bring both of those individuals to the table, the one it worked for would be fine with whatever it is. The one it didn't work for obviously would want it less restrictive, would want, again, your analogy, letting the mouse get whatever they want.
Yeah, except that you're doing it with a specific sign. You don't ever do that. You say to them, what are you trying to communicate? What's the message you want? Mm-hmm. And how does that message get out there? Here's the problem. If you let them say, this is the tool I want to put up to communicate, you're never going to win. If you say, keep the board clean, what kind of message do you want? Well, I want them to know that I do, massage work. Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do you want them to find that out? Well, I want them to be able to read it. Okay. So how can they read that you have, there's a dozen different ways. But see, what happens if you take a specific sign and then you work off of that, whether they can make that sign, or, then they're not going to bend. Mm-hmm. You got to work off their idea. I find that people do that too often. Too often people go to the end. They go to the end, so to speak. They don't go through why they want that. Mm-hmm. I did that with a bar opener. A bar, he says, I've got to have a hanging sign. I've got to have a hanging. I said, just forget a minute. What are you trying to say? Well, I'm a bar. Okay. And how does a person know that there's a bar downtown? I mean, what you drive through a town, how do you know it's a bar? Well, it's because of the windows is eventually where we got to. And then I eventually got him to say, having something in my window really tells a lot more than some hanging sign. And I dare say, and have any of you ever been in a bar? Well, some of you can't, but if you've ever been in a bar, do you look for the hanging sign or do you look in the window to see what's on tap or what's, right? I mean, how do you tell the difference between a clothing store and a tavern? Do you look at a sign that's hanging out? Do you?
No.
No. And see, that's the point you got to make with the people. It's what's your message and what's the best way to sell your message without being dangerous. Hanging signs are dangerous. They come down, they fall. People run into them with putting up Christmas decorations. I just saw one broken off, you know. That's what I'm saying.
And I want to make one point on that too. I think actually it's a perfect example of the idea came to us because someone had put hanging signs up and we realized they weren't allowed in our community. And we said, well, does that make sense? No. Plan Commission had a discussion, allowed hanging signs, and came up with, okay, it can only be so far off the sidewalk. You can't have it 6 feet and hitting people's head. You know, we brought it down to 8 feet, which we felt was the lowest it could be. And the reason that these particular ones weren't allowed is because it wasn't over 7. It was under 7 feet. So it was a great example of, I think, there was an idea that came forward because we saw it was a need in the community. It was looked at objectively, and it worked for one, and unfortunately it didn't for another, but for the right reasons. So.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can find this person who wants his message to get or her message to get out. We'll find a way to do it. And that's what you have to do. We'll find a way. Your purpose is the message. Your purpose is not a piece of plastic hanging off your building or a piece of wood or a piece of metal. You know, really. Enough said.
Thank you.
I'll be here all night.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks. Awesome. Drive safe, Steve. All right, let's go back and get to our regular agenda. Thank you, you guys.
See you
Dave,
guys. Thanks.
Scott. Lori, you can hang in there if you want to. Good to see you.
I think I'm going to leave if that's all right, but thank you.
All right, so we need to approve these planning commission meetings. We had a special or a public hearing on November 3rd, and then of course our regular meeting. You could see them, they were sent out separately from the normal packet, and I think it says draft on there, but they actually are the minutes of those two meetings. So what we do is just make a motion to approve these so we can place them on file. If anybody would like to make that motion.
Yeah, I'll motion to approve.
Motion by Ivan, second by Alan, that we approve those, both those minutes of the meetings. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, say no. Motion carried. All right, then we got, this is going back to what we had with our public hearing, and Jared, I think you're up on this. This is doing with the zoning change for the River North subdivision, which is out on Railton Street and Godfrey Drive.
Yeah, so this is what the public hearing was about. So this starts on page 2 of your packet, kind of with the public hearing notice, moves down to the exhibit, and then the staff report kind of follows that on page 4. So again, we're really looking at doing this initial rezone of this area as we look to start progressing on the neighborhood development that I think has been talked about at Plan Commission and Common Council level for quite a number of times now. So the initial step is just rezoning this to get it to that residential, as we are starting to look at progressing through grants and possibly constructing residential, as soon as 2022, but more likely 2023 if all the proper processes are followed and approvals are gained. Looking to rezone this again to R3 because R3 does allow for multifamily, 2-family, and single-family. So just allows that wide versatile land uses in residential. With the creation of this neighborhood, of course, you will see this more than just tonight, as land is surveyed, land is sectioned off, and land is rezoned to zone it appropriately for what the specific use ends up being. I'll take any questions if you have any.
I've got one. So we've kind of mentioned or talked about this section out here of, I mean, obviously we're shooting for residential, but what if a convenience store wanted to be, I guess, built maybe in the corner by the roundabout? Would that be allowed with the new zoning?
So with the new zoning, R3, I believe, would not allow for that. Now, for such an item to go in, it would need to be surveyed. It would need to be subdivided. So there are further steps in the process before they get to that. If that is the case, as we are working on this, we would just re-go through that process and zone it appropriately to what it should be. Just zoning into this R3 initially is really just to cover those grants that we're applying for. If any of the parcels that we end up looking to be, so for example, if we exclude that corner on the roundabout, in this rezone, which it's part of the larger parcel, so it would be kind of difficult, and we end up wanting to put, apply for a grant for something specifically on that parcel, we would immediately be denied because it's not zoned for that. So I guess, to answer your question, it's not, but it can always be rezoned appropriately to what the interest in the parcel is.
Okay. Be rezoned back.
And not necessarily back, because I-2 doesn't really work either, but to the appropriate.
Well, yeah, the 2030 future use has community mixed use.
Right.
So that would allow it to be rezoned to something more appropriate.
Correct.
Okay. I think important part of this whole rezoning of this property is if you look at the owners of this property, the city of Waupaca owns all of this property. So we're making a decision and obviously being approved by the council, but it doesn't include anybody but the city of Waupaca right now. So this is in a ordinance form, so this will have to be recommended to city council. So, motion to recommend to city council to approve this.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Motion by Alan, second by Eric, that we recommend to city council ordinance number 19-2021. Any further discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, say no. Motion carried. All right, next up, then you have the 2021, which is dealing with traffic, parking, and access amendments.
Yeah, so this starts on page 13 of your packet. This one was brought to you at the prior meeting to kind of talk about. It was not in ordinance form at that point. The red line that was included at that meeting does start on page 16 to kind of go over each of the sections that were proposed to be changed. The ordinance, of course, shows those direct changes. I know at the last meeting, it was kind of discussed that the section regarding number of parking stalls required, it was in there, just some not clear language that the developer, the builder, consultant needs to provide a parking study to show how many parking stalls they need. So again, the premise of this is, we do not know the business as well as the business owners, as well as the developer as they are working with the business owners. So to a sense, us dictating that they have, a certain number of parking stalls that may far exceed their actual need for parking. It's more of a hindrance than a help. We want to see those businesses succeed. We don't want to see a concrete jungle in our city. We being in the area we are, with the chain of lakes by us, our natural resources, we like seeing that green open space, ensuring that all the properties maintain that. So by, potentially forcing somebody to add an additional 25 stalls, we're not really maintaining that feel that I think the city is looking to go for. So again, just trying to make this easier through the process by allowing the developer to offer more input in what they're potentially doing with their development, and then still having staff, plan commission review it and approve it if need be, and then recommend changes, of course, if need be. So I will take any further questions you have on this. More than happy to answer those.
So, Jared, if you were to give an example of maybe, I know you're new to the city, but of a development that you feel would benefit from this change?
I guess one that we dealt with recently was Foundations for Living out on Churchill Street. So as we looked at that development, they were required to have, I think with both, it was upwards of 30 parking stalls. Now at any one time, this is a warming shelter. So, as unfortunate as to say, many individuals using that facility most likely do not even own a car. They have a retail store, they had offices in there. At max, they were looking at maybe 12 parking stalls being filled. But again, our code was looking at requiring them to have upwards of 30. And so by forcing them to have that 30 parking stalls paved, we would be forcing them to put in permanent paved surface that they're never even going to use. So I guess that would be an example. Another example I can think of, in accordance to our code, and this isn't us specifically, but one I have dealt with in the past, the recreational vehicles stores, which sell your ATVs, UTVs, snowmobiles, all of those of such, they have a large showroom. Now with that large showroom to accommodate obviously a 6-person UTV, and still have room for people to walk around, it's quite a large building. So by going by the square footage of that retail space, for a business that you're maybe going to have, as much as we all would love to be in that store buying things, you're maybe going to have 4 or 5 people at one time, 3 salesmen, 1 manager, but your sales space would require you to have 30, 40 stalls, as you're grouping yourself into a Walmart or a local grocery store of some sort, where that is the case, but in this, it isn't. So just trying to distinguish those and rule out those oddities. Of course, if a grocery store comes in and they say, well, at any one time, we plan to have 40 people in the store, and 10 staff. At that point, a minimum of 50 stalls is needed, and it's going to be in the developer's best interest to ensure they have plenty of parking, to the point that they're going to probably add 10, 15 more to ensure that.
Great. Good examples. So again, this is something you've seen in the past. It's just now in ordinance form. And again, this would be a recommendation to City Council. Anybody want to make a motion?
I'd move to approve.
Second.
That was Eric, I'm sorry. Motion by Eric, second by Ivan, that we recommend to council ordinance number 20-2021. Any discussion? All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, say no. Motion carried. We already did the presentation, so let's go down.
I just want to make one comment, if I could interrupt, sorry. In regards to this one, if you are kind of keeping up on the ordinances, and as they go through Common Council, with the Common Council possibly not having a meeting on the 21st to account for holiday season, this was going to be pushed back to the January Common Council, just to ensure that when the first public hearing is had, it kind of goes in a semi-reasonable order. Otherwise, if we have it at the most recent next week, December meeting for Common Council, and we go the rest of December without even talking about it, it kind of may go unnoticed by public. So to try to keep that fluid and, moving forward in a reasonable and a timely fashion, we're going to move it to January for the first reading by the Common Council. So just as a heads up, now that it probably matters much, but
No? Good to know. Okay, let's go down to discussion items. Jarrett, you got floor again here.
yeah. So first discussion item, it is signage. If you it's kind of just open, if you guys wanted to have any further discussion on signage, just wanted to include this in here. If there's no further discussion, I know we had a lengthy presentation and a little bit of discussion with the presentation, but just wanted to include this just in case.
Yeah, you know, what I'd like to do with this discussion is we've got this term that we call debriefing. We've been doing that when we have meetings and something like that. So let's put this on the agenda, the January agenda, and we'll just let everybody soak it in for now and talk about it a little bit more at the January meeting. That sounds good.
Sounds perfect. I guess I will move to the next one if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so site plan requirements, again, trying to keep these discussions fairly simple, just really wanted to bring them to you. They will come back. If you guys have comments in between, feel free to just email. We can, I can include those in the next meeting for us to actually talk about. Site plan has come up though. This is somewhat of a new section. A lot of new things are coming with this, like the change in use permit that we had talked about at prior meetings. Items like that, it's no longer somewhat of a decision by staff if it needs a site plan permit or not. It is specifically stated any new structure, I'm just trying to find it here. Any new structure, any change in use, anything requires a site plan. So it requires this review. It doesn't specifically call out non-residential change in uses, stuff like that. So really just trying to look at this section, clean it up. I can kind of walk through some of the changes here initially. So on page 22, you'll see a red line. In section 2, this is kind of talking about what staff approves, what plan commission approves. So of course, single family, 2-family development, staff approves. Single family, 2-family redevelopment, staff would approve. So if they're adding an addition to their house. As we kind of move through this change in use was that new one. It really wasn't stated anywhere. I guess from talks of how it was being done, staff was approving it, unless it was some, oddity that staff felt plans commission should look at. It had some significance, whether it's a brand new zoning district or something, again, that staff felt it's just worthwhile that the plan commission takes a look at. And then any minor non-residential site plans or site plan amendments that do not significantly alter or the overall layout of the lot, use, or surrounding development. So an example of this would have been downtown, there was a crumbling garage that the property owner was looking to rebuild. It was going the exact same footprint. Nothing was changing. They just want to make it structurally sound. So if somebody's going through an alleyway or somebody parked in it, it didn't cave in on them. So really nothing was changing. It was just rebuilding exact same footprint. If that would have been extended at all or added another floor at that point, definitely would have been significant. So that's an example. Again, how plan commission feels about that, weighing in on if that's, the intent, if really anything non-residential, if you want to, look at it, if change of use, just trying to balance that, if it's simple enough and doesn't have that significant impact, is it something that plan commission should be reviewing, or are there other priority items that they would like to be reviewing instead? Just some clarification in the letter B, 2B, and then exemptions, so change in use site plan, so it really doesn't call out this either. So technically any change in use requires a site plan, which is a bit much. So signifying that a single family residence to a single family residence. So if it receives new owners, it technically should be getting a change in use to ensure that that new use is complying. Now, is that implied that it's not intended? Probably. But just specifically calling that out, so it is for sure in writing that no, you don't need to go through this change in use site plan to just re-enter a new home. Same with 2-family to 2-family, a possible another one, and you kind of run into this issue. If it's previously a baker on Main Street, bakery, and it transitions to a bakery, should that require a change in use? You could argue no, but the other argument would be, how do we know it is a bakery unless you go out and ask them? So again, looking at that change of use, that's why we previously went through, made it $25 to try to encourage, say, hey, what are you changing it to? Let's make sure it all complies. I'm not sure if you guys still feel about that.
I'm confused.
Confused? Sorry.
A little confused. If somebody buys a new home, it's single family, and it's just different people moving in, but it's still single family. How is that use changing?
It's how do we know it's not changing is the thing. I mean, similar argument can be, and I'm saying this is accepted. This is an exception, so we wouldn't want to look at these.
So then the same thing about the bakery. If it's a bakery, it's just different ownership. How is that if it's still going to be operated as a bakery?
And that's the argument, but how do we know it's operating as a bakery? So a bakery can move out, but if nobody comes in and tells us that a bakery's moving in, same argument. I can go either way on it. I don't have that much of a preference, but just something we want to distinguish. If it is going from, the same use, changing to the same use. I guess another example could be over on Water Street. There's a building set up that it was 5 years ago. It was residential. It was set up for residential. It is not intended to be residential. It is not built to be residential, but it was residential, sat vacant. Somebody actually just purchased it and began using it for residential. So building code, looking at safety aspects, all of that, we would never even know kind of thing.
So the corner pet store has new ownership. It was a pet store, still is a pet store. So what would that person under this new code have to do then?
New ownership?
Yeah.
And that would be another discussion. The discussion, I guess, in my mind, if it's remaining that same business, just as transferring owners, I would say not. The business name is all staying the same. Everything is staying the same. Now, if it was going to Phil's Pet Store to Phil's Pet Store Grooming Plus, at that point, yes, there's going to be some gray area in there. And
so then it goes underneath the site plan review. In that case, would be staff level then?
Yeah, it would just be a staff level, and that would be the $25 permit just to take a look at it, say, yeah, it's compliant.
Okay, I'm good now. Not
Okay.
confused.
Sorry.
Don't apologize. You're fine.
Yeah, and again, bringing this to you, and this is not something that's going to be probably in ordinance form anytime soon, but something I wanted to bring to you guys, think about, bring comments. We could have 2 months to sit on it and debrief about it kind of thing. But I guess I'll continue through just to keep things rolling here. So as you move down, you get to section 4 where we have building design standards. So again, distinguishing between, we have a site plan and we have a change in use site plan. The change in use site plan is meant to be minimal, just make sure that it's the use is conforming, fixing up probably a couple different things if needed. So really these building design standards don't really apply to change in uses. So just specifically stating they are exempt. Same thing with site design standards. The change of use site plans are exempt from this section because the site is usually pretty well developed. Buildings shall provide safe traffic circulation. There are a couple things you can kind of look at, but a lot of things just, they don't fit. One of the big ones for site design standards, which probably is not going to come up as our downtown is pretty developed, but talking about refuse screening. So we went through a process with an individual downtown that, they were needing to screen in their refuse, which just didn't work in an alleyway. So just exempting that. And then really the big one, kind of wanted some consideration and comments on, is the site design standards for change in use site plans. So when we look at this change of use, we make sure that the proposed uses are conforming with the permitted uses in the applicable zoning district. Provide for safe traffic circulation. If it's not safe, obviously we shouldn't be allowing it. Adequate parking. It's pretty much just they come in, they say, yeah, there's 5 stalls available. We have 2 employees and no customers. That makes sense. Appropriate landscaping, so ensuring that they do and provide the appropriate buffers if they have a parking lot, things like that. Exterior lighting, downward facing shielding, that's pretty easy. Refuse and recycling areas. So this is one I did kind of have a question on how the Plan Commission felt. So if it is just a change in use, is that something, we would want to be seeing them fix the refuse and recycling areas being screened? It can be an extra expense. At the same time, is that what we want to see in the community? Shielded dumpsters, not having the dumpsters face out, not calling any of them out. But if you take a look, if you maybe came into City Hall, there's a building right next to City Hall where the dumpsters are directly next to the sidewalk. Is that something you want to see? Screening, so a little bit of buffer is there so that when people are walking to your downtown, they're not walking directly past garbage, dumpsters. Just some consideration, I guess, if that's really what we want to see. And quite honestly, all of these in a new development, pretty standard to require these, but in a change of use for somebody coming from, starting to rent out a vacant building a building that was vacant, do you also want to see them put in the effort to screen that refuse and go through all the other ones, change the lighting if needed, install landscaping? Is that something we want to see in that process or not? And again, the exemptions, and then just any contrary elements that we would want to be seen change. So that is a section, I guess, kind of wanted your consideration on thoughts on what we should be requiring, if anything. If you want to see it just minimal, just that, is it the proposed use? Does it have, is everything safe in it? Does it have adequate parking? And then leave it at that. I guess kind of where everyone's heads are at. And no answer now. Again, just take time to think on it. And then really the rest of the changes are just kind of loosening up. Currently, in our plan data requirements, per our code, every single application has to have every bit of this information in it. Just adding language as applicable and kind of leaving that up to the zoning administrator to determine, say, if we are requiring landscaping, you need a landscaping plan. Can you please provide that? If you don't need landscaping, then don't even waste your time with it. But as it stands now, whether you have completed the landscaping requirements or not, you should be submitting a landscaping plan. So just trying to loosen that up, make it easier on any developers or applicants. Well, I apologize. That was a lot, probably confusing. Let me know if you have any questions about it. If you have questions now that I can clear up, I'm sure there are probably plenty. Otherwise, feel free to email those over. We can discuss it. I can put it on the next January or even February, talk about it, and we can just get this down pat to make sure that it is encompassing the vision of what the Plan Commission is looking for.
So this would come back then as an action item?
Probably not as an action item, just another discussion.
Oh,
Just to allow more time, if free up if people want to discuss certain things. It is kind of a heavy one, but it would probably come back as a discussion item, and then after that discussion, if the plan commission feels that it is at a point that we can put it in ordinance form, then we can do that. But I don't want to rush this one at all.
Yeah, Eric, go ahead.
I'm already late. I need to excuse myself.
We're good.
Teaching class here in about 5 minutes.
You're
Yeah.
teaching in class?
What is that?
Yeah. Bible class.
Oh, cool.
So, sorry.
No, that's okay.
First, every Wednesday, actually. But
Good luck.
these meetings don't typically go this late, so it doesn't.
No, and if you would have told us ahead of time, it wouldn't have helped anyway.
All right.
set priorities.
See you guys.
Bye.
See you, Eric. All right, keep going.
All right, I'll just keep on going. Another discussion item. This is one that is fairly straightforward, just kind of I don't want to say an error, but just something that doesn't seem right from a staff level. So as you're kind of going through, getting a couple interest inquiries to putting in a restaurant of some sort. Kind of took a look at everything, and really it's only allowed in the B5, which B5 is very scarce throughout the city. So it didn't really make much sense that it was just in B5 as a permitted use. Then took a look in our definitions of, what each zoning district should encompass. And like the B4, for example, it's specifically called out restaurants, fast food restaurants, that these were what we want to see in that zoning district. So, from myself reading that and then going and looking that we have it as a conditional use, it just seemed like this extra barrier that we were putting in place to try to connect and cooperate with businesses. So as you see in the proposal, it kind of shows B4 permitting those drive-in restaurants, those fast food, other than fast food, and then the drive-up walk order service, which I kind of picture as, I believe it's like the hot dog stand out on Fulton Street kind of thing. So, those are the types of things we see in B4 anyways. The code calls it out that these are what we want in B4, so it made sense to permit these in B4 and reduce that extra step for something that seemed as though it should be there anyways. Kind of looking at the restaurants other than drive-through fast food, I look at Little Fat Gretchen's, for example, or I look at Salt and Belly. I also look at, as I live in Stevens Point, I look at the restaurants they have downtown and what they bring to the downtown. It didn't really make sense that we don't want to see those restaurants there. And I think one of the big issues people have is parking. But especially in this downtown area, looking at B2 specifically, we have a lot of off-street parking designated. We have city parking lots that can be parked in. We have, the street parking. And then there are even some businesses that have their own parking. So that was kind of the big one I saw. Not to get on parking again. But kind of why you see restaurants other than fast food. And in the B1, that's over on Churchill Street, where we see like H.H. Hinder Brewing Company. For myself, thinking of like Central Waters, I would love to see a restaurant there. As you are going there to have a good night and just be with friends and be in an enjoyable place. Why wouldn't you want food there as well? So getting away from the fast food and the drive-in there, but still allowing restaurants. So I guess this is one was looking to kind of get some input on, and one just kind of possibly bringing back next meeting in ordinance form if it is something that commissioners didn't have any questions on or didn't felt as though this was the right direction. I did include in here some other cities that kind of have where their restaurants are allowed. again, like Oshkosh, for example, suburban mixed use, urban mixed use, central mixed use district would be like our B2. It is permitted. Appleton, similar. They have a lot less zoning districts, but still, again, permitted. Neenah, they have even fewer, but they are permitted in their drive-in restaurants. Again, they make conditional in their central business downtown district, but we have it conditional anyways. So very similar, these changes to kind of coincide with what other communities have. Just trying to be more inviting to the businesses that I would think want to see here, but open to questions, comments, whatever you guys would have to offer.
I think it's a good idea. This brings up another question. Then you talked about it a little bit here, but you said we have a lot more districts than maybe even communities that are larger than us. Is that another discussion that we have at combining some of these districts in the future?
That is another discussion. I think really the two main ones from my short time here that I can see is the B4 and the B5. So B5 is essentially B4. So I think that one, and again, we have very few B5 left. I honestly think if I can recall the zoning map in my head, we maybe have 5 to 10 parcels that are B5 out of all of them. But the majority are kind of B4. It's the maroon parcels. You'll see one kind of by the Fleet Farm area, I believe. No, that's not Fleet Farm. That is...
It's
I guess Fleet Farm area. They have it at the other interchange, and then the one up kind of in the middle by the Foundry area, that's or the golf course, that's Peterson, like the dealerships, which those have already went through a zoning change. So we really have very, very few. So I think that's one we clean up, transition to B4, make it easy. The other one I can see, which would be a bit of work, would be the B2 and the B7. I know B7 was created specifically for some reasons, but from and obviously conflicting, zoning and economic development a little bit, but to an extent, the B7 really is B2, and with some extra restrictions or requirements on the differences in B7, a merger to B2 wouldn't be that unfeasible. So those are kind of the two main ones I've seen. A1, R1, R2, R3, mobile home, those are all pretty standard. You're cleaning up the business districts, and the I1, I2 is pretty standard as well. So I think those would be the two big ones. There would be a little footwork to do with it, but nothing that wouldn't be doable. Manageable.
Yeah, great. All right, keep on moving.
All right, and if you have any questions between now and the next one, I'll bring this back probably in ordinance form, but feel free to email me. I will make sure those go in the packet so everybody can kind of read them beforehand, and we can come and we can have any discussions that would be needed.
I'll say I support it. Not the rezone. I would be in favor of that too, but going back to the restaurant policy specifically, making it easier for food serving restaurants to be embedded in the community is something I'm all for. So
yeah, and a main picture I thought of when Main Street was actually under construction still, specifically the part in front of Little Fat Gretchen's. Our economic development specialist, we were going to go grab a bite to eat in Little Fat Gretchen's, and we walked in, and even under construction, they had no availability for like the next hour. So we had to go somewhere else, which there was no parking at that time, not an issue. They're still full, bringing tons of people to the downtown. Food service is just one of those things that I think people flock to, and in a good way. But next one's just kind of wanted to open for discussion. So these are the revised zoning applications. Again, they are pretty similar to the ones that we had originally created. They're just more specifically catered to the specific things that people would be building, like fences, accessory structures, pools. Before we did have an 8-page document that, kind of went through every single thing. So even if you weren't putting up a fence, you saw items regarding fence. And it just became very convoluted. People had such troubles understanding it. So staff wanted to go through, kind of narrow it down. They're really essentially the same permits, just clarifying items that we've seen have been an issue, and then just taking out unnecessary items. We did use a combination of our old zoning forms, which people talked very highly about, and then again the existing zoning forms that people had issues with, but again conform to our current code. So I know this was requested to be brought back to you. I wanted to bring it back to you guys. If you guys had any comments, suggestions, possibly if you guys have worked through these. I know these are fairly new, so you probably haven't. But just anything you see and you want to comment on, definitely something that we can have further discussions on, or staff can consider changing or rewording if something doesn't make sense. But just wanted to bring it to you guys for discussion, talk about it. Didn't want to bring it as an action item in case there is something that changes. We didn't want to have to bring through and again have you guys approve it, have common council approve it. So still wanted input, and please, anytime if you see any issues with anything or you feel could be bettered or changed with not just forms but anything, feel free to bring it up to staff, and can definitely talk it at a staff level during one of our meetings and then bring it again further to you. So more than happy to go over those things. But that's really the gist of those. There are a lot of pages.
Yeah. If I could make one comment.
Yeah.
I like the idea of pictures. Makes it pretty easy to see which form you have to go to, but I would strongly suggest that maybe we find some pictures that are of Waupaca
Okay.
in there instead of examples that happen in Waupaca and not other communities necessarily.
Okay.
As one quick comment, I think that and I think you've covered this a little bit, but just to reiterate, the most complicated and difficult part about the one we're coming off of and transitioning out of was, like you said, there's a 7 to 8 page form and it had information for all of these different permits, and people did not know what to fill out and what not to. And this, at least if you get a pool, or if you want to put up a pool, the stuff for a pool is in there, and there's not extra stuff. You don't have to guess at it. So,
Are these all going to be fillable forms too that are on our website?
Yeah, so we are switching to that software that will essentially, we have to do a little bit of footwork for this, but essentially what you see is going to be just an online format with drop-down boxes, trying to make it as easy as possible in that aspect. These will still be available for those who do not have access to computers. But the intention is to have them on our website still, but they will be more utilized on the software. And then they'll be in paper, which will be hand-filled.
Even now with what we have, if you click on any of those blue boxes, you can type in information.
Yeah, I guess you kind of see that, in that one.
I guess I'm not in PDF, so I didn't
Oh.
realize that. I'm just looking at the website. But yeah, does it save it though? I mean, you can always fill it in, but does it save it?
If you save it.
PDF, so you have to make sure that it saves it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, if you guys have anything moving forward, just let me know. We'll just kind of continue going on. Internal site plan reports. So this was a bit early due to holidays. Staff had vacation. Did send this out a little bit early. So the next month's internal site plan report we'll have from September 17th to the end of September, and then whatever for December. But we had a change in use, vanity properties, some new single-family homes. Those are filling up in the subdivision over by the airport, so that's really great to see. I think they only have 10 or so properties left, so awesome to see those are infilling and we're adding people to the city. Change in use Summit Accounting next door to the city hall. Change in use a commercial to a residential. So this Fulton Street was over by the old highway department, street department building. And it was offices, but they are transitioning it into residential through the building permit and building inspection process. Two that are currently, or a couple that are in process, change of use over on East Union Street. That is actually now pretty well complete. Just need to finish up a couple last minute things. Thrive It Financial, that one is approved now. I'll have that on the other report though. And then Brunner Drive. So this is a minor site plan. So again, kind of looking at that site plan. So this would be a good example. So as you know, the Foundry, they have they have a building, but really they have buildings next to buildings next to buildings as, their filing building is here, and then next in the process line, it's their polishing building, and, so on and so forth. But one of the buildings in their center, one of the sections of the building in the center of the overall building, they were looking to raise the roof on. So exact same footprint, nothing was changing there. They were just increasing the height of the roof to accommodate some new interior machinery that they wanted to include to better their processes. So because of that, nothing was really changing. Went through the requirements, made sure everything was kosher, and went ahead and approved that internally. But another example of if that's something Plan Commission wants to see, exact same footprint, nothing was really changing, just raising the height. Just something to ponder. Other than that, that's about it. The permit report, if you happen to have any questions on that. Otherwise, the code enforcement status reports, I can take any questions on that as well. I will say we are still a little slow with code enforcement. Trying to prioritize the more priority tasks, but still trying to get to these. It's always a battle.
Yeah, so on code enforcement too, just as a reminder to people that are on council, but maybe that's something we do here too. We were gonna make a presentation on how we're gonna handle snow removal. And I think maybe it would be helpful if we did it at both meetings. I don't think it would take long, but.
So the snow removal section, just
Yeah.
going over that?
Yeah, just going over it and how we're gonna handle it, I think is a great idea. You've asked a couple times, and my thought on things that staff can approve and planning commission or council should approve. I always use the theory that if there's something that you think either a council member or a commissioner or the mayor are going to get, I would bring it to one of the committees or commissions.
Okay.
If not, if it seems non-controversial, it might end up to be there, but if it seems non-controversial, you should be able to handle it.
Yeah.
And anything that, obviously, that you don't feel comfortable with too.
Yeah, like an example brought forward, and I kind of mentioned that in the discussion of that, but it was like the Foundations for Living, something very unique to the city, new to the city, so wasn't comfortable. But I appreciate that direction.
Yeah. Anything else for the good of the meeting tonight? Before we lose enough people to vote to leave? Do we have a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Yeah, second.
A motion by Alan, second by Ivan, that we adjourn till our next scheduled meeting, which is January of 2022. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. We're adjourned at 7:26.